of black people is actually a precondition for this anti-black white terror vampiric system to flourish. This system finds its legitimacy in a climate of African mass impoverishment. I want you to understand how our impoverishment is structured into the mechanics, intricacies of this system. How we are by necessity being impoverished. How our very poverty has become the necessary fuel for the machinery of this anti-black pandemic, socio-political, cultural pandemic called white supremacy to function to its optimal. And I want you to understand that you are poor by design, and in this whole white terror machinery, how your poverty is mechanized and what psychological output with your poverty is intended, and what that particular psychological output serves in the bigger scheme of things for the preservation of this anti-black, anti-African dynamic called white supremacy, or rightly so, as in the words of Baba Kamau Kambon, who admonishes us, by the way, to stop calling this thing white supremacy, because he says it is psychologically placing ourselves to subservience by calling this anti-black dynamic white supremacy, because the denotation therefore becomes white people are supreme. And if it gets embedded in our psyche, it then weakens our resistance. It then numbs our consciousness to complicity and submission. Now, back to black mass, African mass impoverishment as the white power structure's psychological weapon. This system needs you to be poor because your poverty is a necessity for its propulsion. It needs you to be poor because when you are poor, you become hopeless. Especially when coupled with your poverty is your spiritual castration, which means being in a state of disabled capacity to locate yourself in time and space. This is what is meant by spiritual castration here. Your poverty coupled with that would surely, because now you're not in charge of your cognitive maps, you view yourself in obscurity, your thoughts are synthetic thoughts, are artificial thoughts that were implanted into your conquered mental universe and psyche. Then you become hopeless, and this hopelessness would then breed desperation, and when you're desperate, you are susceptible and vulnerable to being usurped by anyone for whatever ends. And this is how you are now converted into being a slave who willingly cooperate in their enslavement. This state of desperation, this state of hopelessness sort of psychs you up to cooperating, but before cooperating, it psychs you up to intimating yourself to the anomalies that you are subjected to, accepting them ultimately as how things should be, accepting them ultimately as being the inevitable, as being the beyond control, as being the formidable. You have to understand the psychology of power. This is how we have psychologically being overwhelmed to have an element of a defeated society. That becomes the central theme about us. The negative self-image that we find ourselves thinking, feeling, perceiving within, and through which we convey our lives, makes us intimate ourselves with defeat itself. It makes us see defeat not as a defeat, but as the very part of our genetic makeup. It makes both the enemy and the problem unidentifiable and therefore unopposable. It renders them, thus. So, in order to create this enslavement autopilot, the enslaver simply numbs our consciousness to dependency, and as a result snatches his support. Listen to this. Your consciousness is numbed to dependency, and thereafter support is snatched from you. This is the game that is being played here. And you would think that this is simply the struggle for survival. No, it's not the struggle for survival. Poverty is designed to serve a particular psychological end in order to elicit from you the unduly obtained willingness to cooperate in your own degradation, in your own exploitation, in your own oppression, to a point of your complicity masking your horrors as your amusements. This is how horrible this is. And here the enslaver, like I've earlier on alluded to, the enslaver's intention is to have your consciousness numbed to dependency so that he can later on once you are chronically, dependent, snatch his support. Now, here poverty is actually one of the system's functionality requirements. Without poverty, this system won't function. And you think there's will within the system to end poverty. No, there isn't. Poverty is this system's functionality requirement. Without poverty, this system would be dysfunctional. And the freedom that we are told, or were told we had, which never materialized, some of us have ingloriously appointed ourselves spokespersons and defenders of this deception, liberation myth discourse. Clearly, at the core of our problems lies powerlessness. We need power to reverse the predicament we are in. What is power? Power is nothing but the ability to achieve our ends against any form of resistance, opposition, and clamor. That is what power is. That ability to be able to exert and impose your will on any situation through which you navigate, you influence for purposes of navigating to your intended destiny, becoming the captain of your own ship. That is power. That is power. Then without that, all that discourses that people are actually engaging in is deodorizing violence and terror that is meted out against us in nuanced forms, and most of which are subtle. So this is the subject that I'm discussing, in my upcoming literary offering, called Unshackle, Stepping on Toes, a case for the reorientation of African consciousness. This is the work of consciousness reorientation, psychospiritual incentive intended to give impetus to our race to rise and ascend back to its former glory. The main focus of my work is dealing with the psychodynamics of black oppression and showing how, through cognitive domination, we have become accomplices and accessories in crimes that are being committed against us as a race. And peace and love to you, family.